I never thought I'd say this, but one of the most transformative days of my life started with a ridiculous, borderline insane idea, letting my 30-year-old cousin beat me up. If you told me a year ago that I'd willingly put myself in that position, I would have laughed you off. But here I am, sharing the story of how that day changed everything, and why it might have been the best thing that ever happened to me. It all started with Megan. She's my older sister, but I need to explain how complicated things were between us before I get into the punchlines. Megan's struggles were always intense. Her battles with addiction, her erratic behavior, the way she seemed to spiral out of control in ways I couldn't understand or fix. When Jackson, my son, was born, Megan's obsession with him became something darker, something I had to protect him from. There was the stalking. The phone calls in the middle of the night. The attempts to show up unannounced. It was terrifying and exhausting. I'll never forget the day I realized just how far she'd gone, how much danger Jackson was actually in. That was the moment I knew I had to take action, no matter how hard or painful. Protecting Jackson was the only thing that mattered. Megan was arrested after a particularly scary incident, and that felt like both a relief and a heartbreak. Relief because the immediate threat was gone, heartbreak because I still loved her, even if I feared her. Over the next months, Megan entered treatment and worked hard on sobriety. The reports from her therapists were cautiously optimistic. She was attending sessions, passing tests, staying out of trouble. But I wasn't naive. I couldn't just erase the trauma she caused. I set firm boundaries: no contact, no unsupervised visits, no gifts without approval. And I made it crystal clear, if Megan crossed those boundaries, the communication would end immediately. For a long time, it felt like a stalemate. I wanted to believe Megan was changing, but I was terrified of letting my guard down. The constant anxiety, the jumping at every noise, checking locks multiple times a night, it stayed with me. My therapist, Dr. William, reminded me that my reactions were normal and that healing would take time. He told me, trust is earned, not owed. That phrase stuck with me. Then, after nearly 2 years of sobriety, Megan and I cautiously started talking again, first by email and photos, then video calls, and finally carefully supervised in-person meetings. She never asked for access to Jackson, just for a chance to be a sister again. That honesty was the first step in rebuilding a fractured relationship. During this time, Megan moved into a neighboring town and started a new career in addiction counseling. She seemed genuinely committed to her recovery and to making amends. Our relationship became something new, not the close sisterhood I once dreamed of, but a fragile, cautious connection built on respect and boundaries. But what about me? Through all this, I realized that I hadn't just been protecting Jackson. I'd also been protecting myself, from fear, from trauma, from the lingering shadow of what Megan's addiction had done to our family. That's when my cousin, a physically strong, level-headed guy with a calm demeanor, suggested something that sounded utterly crazy. What if I let him beat me up? At first, I was shocked. Why would I want to do that? How could that possibly help? But the more we talked, the more I realized it was about reclaiming control. About facing fear head-on, about transforming pain into strength. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew it would hurt, physically and emotionally. But I also knew that if I didn't confront this in some way, the trauma would keep controlling me. So I said yes. Over the next few weeks, I started training with him, learning how to defend myself, how to stand my ground, how to take a hit without breaking down. It was brutal. I was sore, exhausted, and terrified at times. But there was something powerful in that struggle. I wasn't just preparing for a fight, I was preparing to fight back against my own doubts, my own fears. That first update covers the complicated background and the decision to take this unconventional path. Next, I'll dive into the training, the emotional ups and downs, and how the preparation tested me in ways I never expected. Update: when I first told people I was going to let my cousin beat me up, I was met with a mix of shock, confusion, and outright disbelief. Why would you do that to yourself? My friends asked, and honestly, I didn't have a simple answer. It wasn't about self-punishment or seeking pain for pain's sake. It was about reclaiming something I felt I had lost: control, courage, and the ability to face my fears head-on. My cousin, Jake, is a quiet guy with a strong presence. He's not the type to seek violence, but has always been protective of family. He understood what I was going through, even if he didn't know all the details. When I first approached him with the idea, he hesitated. Obviously, it's not every day someone asks to get beaten up on purpose, but after we talked it through, he agreed. He promised to take care of me, to go easy, and to help me push through my limits safely. The training started awkwardly. I was terrified of the first few sessions. Jake began by teaching me how to position myself, how to move, how to protect my head and vital areas. He showed me how to take a hit without flinching, how to breathe through the pain, and how to stay grounded when everything inside me screamed to run or collapse. Every session was a mix of physical exhaustion and emotional upheaval. I discovered muscles I never knew I had, but I also confronted the tension I'd been carrying inside, the anxiety, the flashbacks, the shame. It was like fighting two battles at once, the one in the ring and the one inside my mind. One afternoon, after a particularly rough round where Jake landed a solid punch to my ribs, I sat on the floor, gasping for breath, tears threatening to spill over. Why am I doing this? I whispered to myself. But then Jake sat beside me and said something I won't forget. You're not just fighting me. You're fighting that fear that's been holding you back. That moment made everything click. This wasn't about the pain from punches. It was about the pain I'd buried for years, the hurt from Megan's betrayal, the terror for Jackson's safety, the loneliness that came with protecting my family at all costs. Facing Jake's punches was a way of facing those wounds, of saying, I'm still here, and I'm stronger than you think. As the weeks passed, the sessions became less about survival and more about empowerment. I learned to stand my ground, to meet each punch with grit, and even to throw a few punches back. Jake never went full force. We agreed the goal wasn't to injure me but to help me build resilience. Training also became a strange kind of therapy. We talked during breaks, about everything from family drama to childhood memories. Jake shared stories about his own struggles and how physical discipline helped him overcome anxiety and depression. Our bond deepened in ways I hadn't expected. This process wasn't just healing me physically, it was reconnecting me with family in a way that felt authentic and supportive. But alongside the progress, there were days when I felt overwhelmed. Sometimes the memories surged back, unbidden and raw, triggered by a missed punch or a sharp jab. On those days, I doubted whether I could go through with it, let alone let Jake actually beat me up. One evening, after a tough session, I broke down in tears. Jake didn't say much. He just sat quietly beside me, letting me cry it out. Then he told me, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be strong all the time. What matters is that you show up. That simple truth became my mantra. Showing up, even when it hurt, even when I was scared, even when the past threatened to consume me. I kept training, kept pushing forward. The day of the fight, as Jake and I half-jokingly called it, finally arrived about 2 months after we started training. I was a bundle of nerves, excitement, and fear. We set some ground rules beforehand. No hitting the face hard, no throwing me to the ground, stop immediately if I said the word pause. The night before, I barely slept. My mind was a whirlwind of what ifs. What if I backed out? What if I couldn't handle it? What if this just made things worse? But underneath all the anxiety was a tiny spark of hope. Maybe this was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment to turn my pain into power. The morning came. We met at Jake's garage, a quiet, private space perfect for what we were about to do. The air smelled faintly of oil and sweat. I wrapped my hands carefully, put on the gloves, and took a deep breath. Jake looked calm but focused. Ready? He asked. Ready as I'll ever be, I replied, my voice shaking. The first punch landed. It wasn't hard, but it was enough to make me flinch. Then another, and another. My body tensed, but I tried to stay relaxed, remembering everything Jake had taught me. Breathe through the pain. Stay grounded. Keep your eyes open. Time slowed down. Each punch was a test, each block or dodge a small victory. The physical pain was intense but manageable. The emotional waves beneath it, the flashbacks, the fear, were harder to hold back. After what felt like both a minute and an hour, Jake stopped. We collapsed onto the floor, breathless, laughing nervously. I couldn't believe I'd made it through the first round. But this was just the beginning. Update: after that first round of getting punched by Jake, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion or soreness, it was deeper. I started to feel like I was peeling away layers of fear and doubt that had been suffocating me for years. Each bruise and ache was a reminder that I was still standing, still fighting, still alive. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle changes. I felt more grounded, more present in my body. My anxiety, which had been like a shadow following me everywhere, loosened its grip just a bit. I even slept better. But more than that, I started to see my relationships in a new light, especially with Megan and Jackson. Megan was still distant. The miscarriage and everything that happened around it created a wall between us, thick and cold. I wanted to reach out, but every time I tried, the fear of causing more pain stopped me. I kept replaying Jackson's words in my head, the blame, the anger. It was a bitter knot I couldn't untangle. One evening, after training with Jake, I found myself sitting alone in my living room, scrolling through old photos of Megan and Jackson, happier times before everything fell apart. I realized that holding on to anger wasn't helping anyone. If I wanted peace, I had to try something different. The next day, I called Megan. My hands trembled as I dialed, unsure if she'd even answer. When she picked up, her voice was cautious, quiet. Hey, I said, my voice soft. Can we talk? We ended up talking for hours that day, about the miscarriage, the hurt, the blame, and the complicated emotions tangled around it all. I apologized for things I'd said in anger, and she apologized too. It wasn't a magic fix, the pain was still there, but it was a start. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of connection. Jackson overheard some of our conversation and came to me later, his eyes bright but unsure. I'm sorry, he said simply. I didn't mean to blame Mom. I know, I replied, pulling him into a hug. We're all hurting, but we'll get through this together. That night, lying in bed, I thought about how far I'd come. The fight with Jake wasn't just about bruises and punches, it was about breaking through the walls I'd built around myself. It was about learning to be vulnerable and strong at the same time. Over the next few weeks, I continued training with Jake, but the sessions became more symbolic than physical. We talked about boundaries, healing, and forgiveness. I even started sparring a little, gaining confidence not just in fighting, but in standing up for myself in everyday life. One day, Jake surprised me by saying, "You've come a long way." I'm proud of you. Those words hit me harder than any punch ever could. But healing wasn't linear. There were setbacks. Days when I felt overwhelmed by grief, guilt, or frustration. Times when I wanted to give up, to retreat back into the safety of numbness. But with Jake's steady support, Megan's gradual openness, and Jackson's innocent trust, I found reasons to keep moving forward. And then came a moment I never expected. Megan invited me to join her and Jackson at a family gathering. It was the first time I'd been around them in months, and the anxiety bubbled up again. But I went. I showed up. That night, surrounded by laughter and warmth, I realized something important. Healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing to face it, together. Update: after that family gathering, I felt a cautious hope growing inside me. It was fragile, like a small plant pushing through cracked concrete, but it was there. For the first time in months, I wasn't drowning in pain, I was beginning to breathe again. Megan and I started spending more time together, not always talking about the miscarriage or the past, but just being. We watched movies, cooked meals, and sometimes sat in comfortable silence. I realized that healing wasn't always about big conversations. Sometimes it was about simply showing up and letting someone know they're not alone. Jackson, too, was changing. He began to smile more, to ask questions, to share little stories about school. Watching him slowly heal reminded me how resilient kids are, how much strength there is in innocence. It gave me hope that our family could survive this. At the same time, my training with Jake continued to be a cornerstone of my healing. Those sessions evolved beyond physical conditioning. Jake became a mentor, pushing me to confront not just my fears but the deeper insecurities I'd carried for years. I learned how to channel anger without letting it consume me, to stand firm without shutting down. One afternoon, after a particularly intense session, Jake and I sat on the steps outside the gym. He looked at me thoughtfully. "You know," he said, "most people fight to hurt. But you're fighting to heal. That's rare." I smiled, exhausted but proud. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm starting to like the fight. It wasn't just the physical fight anymore. It was the fight to reclaim my life, my family, my sense of self. But just as things began to feel more stable, reality reminded me that healing is never a straight path. One evening, Megan and I had a disagreement. Nothing huge, just the kind of small, stubborn fights that happen when two people are still learning how to coexist after trauma. But this one hit harder than usual. "I'm scared," Megan admitted, tears welling in her eyes. "Scared that things will never be the same. That we'll always be broken." I reached out and held her hand. "We are broken," I said gently. "But broken can still mean beautiful. We just have to decide how to put the pieces back together." It was a fragile truce, but a step forward. As the months passed, I found new strength in unexpected places. I reconnected with old friends, started journaling again, and even took small steps toward pursuing passions I'd shelved for too long. The fight with Jake was no longer about survival, it was about thriving. And through it all, Megan, Jackson, and I learned to navigate the messy, painful, and sometimes joyful process of healing as a family. I'm not going to pretend it's all perfect now. There are still hard days, moments when grief crashes in like a tidal wave. But I've learned that those moments don't define me, how I respond does. Looking back, I realized that letting Jake punch me wasn't about proving anything to him or anyone else. It was about proving something to myself. That I could face pain, that I could survive it, and that I could come out stronger on the other side. Update: the physical bruises faded first, the visible reminders of those brutal sessions with Jake slowly disappearing over weeks. But the emotional scars, those ran deep. At times, I felt like I was drowning beneath the weight of what happened, like the trauma was a shadow that clung to me in every quiet moment. It was exhausting. Still, there came a day when I realized something important. I didn't need Jake's punches anymore. Not to feel alive, not to feel in control, and certainly not to feel worthy. It wasn't a sudden breakthrough, but a gradual dawning that I was stronger than my darkest moments. I found therapy invaluable, not just the sessions where I confronted my pain, but the exercises that taught me to reconnect with myself. Breathing exercises, journaling, grounding techniques, these were the tools that helped me wrest control back from the chaos. One day, I wrote something in my journal that I kept coming back to: I am not broken beyond repair. Alongside therapy, I found community. I signed up for a local writing workshop, an activity I'd once loved but abandoned years ago. Writing became my refuge, a way to make sense of the mess inside my mind. Sharing my story with others, sometimes raw, sometimes with humor, reminded me that I wasn't alone. There were others who had faced their own battles and survived. That connection was life-saving. Meanwhile, my relationship with Megan continued to evolve. The miscarriage had left us raw, but it also peeled back layers of resentment and pain, revealing a fragile but genuine closeness. We began to communicate honestly, without the usual defenses or blame. Megan spoke openly about her struggles, the long road she'd walked to recovery. I shared my fears, my mistrust, and my hopes. It wasn't easy. Sometimes the old wounds flared up unexpectedly, a look, a phrase, a memory, but we worked through them. We discovered that forgiveness wasn't a single moment or a magical fix, but an ongoing choice. Forgiving Megan, and myself, meant accepting our flaws, mistakes, and humanity. Jackson, our little anchor, blossomed in ways I'd only dreamed of. Watching him explore the world, his curiosity, his laughter, these were the moments that reminded me why protecting him was my fiercest priority. The trauma had taken so much from all of us, but Jackson's innocence and joy became the fuel that kept me going. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of orange and pink, Megan and I sat quietly on the porch while Jackson played nearby. The air was cool, the kind of peacefulness that felt almost surreal after so much chaos. She reached over and took my hand. "We're going to be okay," she said, her voice soft but steady. I looked at her, really looked, at the woman who had hurt us but was also trying to heal. "We're more than okay," I said, squeezing her hand back. "We're stronger than ever." That strength, I realized, wasn't about being unbreakable or perfect. It was about choosing to rise, again and again, no matter how many times life knocked us down. Of course, life was still messy. Old fears lingered like shadows, and the anxiety of what might happen never fully disappeared. But now, those fears were balanced by resilience, by a hard-earned confidence in my ability to protect my family and build a future. Megan continued her work in addiction counseling, using her story to help others who were struggling. It gave her purpose, a chance to transform her pain into something positive. Watching her grow into this role was bittersweet, but also inspiring. I hoped, maybe for the first time in a long while, that her change was real and lasting. As for me, I learned to trust myself again, to listen to my instincts as a mother, a sister, and a woman who had survived. The boundaries I set were no longer walls of fear but fences of care, protecting what mattered most. I still keep the letter Megan sent from treatment all those years ago, a reminder of how far we've come and a testament to the power of accountability. Trust, once broken, is fragile. It's something earned over time, through actions not words. Sometimes people ask if I've forgiven Megan. I tell them forgiveness is complicated. It's not forgetting or excusing the past, it's accepting the reality of who we are now, the distance between us, and the effort it takes to keep moving forward. Forgiveness is personal, and for me, it's tied to boundaries that keep my son safe. What I have found is a cautious peace. A relationship rebuilt not on illusions or promises, but on respect and hard-won understanding. If you're reading this and going through something similar, here's what I want you to know. Your child's safety is paramount. You don't owe anyone access, not even family. Boundaries are not betrayals. They're necessary acts of love and protection. And finally, healing is possible, not because life becomes perfect, but because we learn to carry our scars with grace and strength.